I was standing in my boss's glass-walled office on the 29th floor when he looked up with that smug little grin and said, "We don't need your overseas guys anymore." Just like that. No build-up, no explanation. 7 words that hit like a sucker punch to the ribs. My name's Alex Vukovic. I'm 39 years old. I live in Chicago. And at that exact moment, I swear I felt every single one of those years land right on my chest. 18 months. That's how long I'd spent building those global deals. Long nights, missed holidays, flying coach to factories most execs couldn't even find on a map. I negotiated contracts in broken English, patched up cultural messes, solved vendor meltdowns at 3 in the morning, all for this smug bastard to kill everything I'd built without even looking up from his damn laptop. I watched as he clicked through the vendor management system, eyes on the screen, canceling contract after contract like he was closing tabs on a browser. Santos in Mexico, gone. Tanaka in Japan, gone. The Petrovas in Eastern Europe, wiped out. He didn't even hesitate, didn't even blink. All I could hear was my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. My hands were clenched so tight, I didn't even realize my nails were digging into my palm. Quick note before I go on. Before listening, share which city or country you're watching from. And the man who'd orchestrated it, the one who took everything from him, sitting right in front of me now. Stanley Remick. Stanley had no idea who I was to him. I kept my face blank, gave him a nod like I was some good little soldier, then turned and walked out, straight past my cubicle, straight past the break room. I locked myself in the far stall of the 12th floor restroom, sat down on the toilet lid, and pulled out my phone. 18 months of groundwork, contacts, stories, handshakes, set in motion with 3 taps. Santos picked up, confused but polite. I told him to sit tight and check his email. Tanaka didn't ask questions, just said, "Understood." The Petrovas? They swore in 3 languages and hung up. I let them. They'd understand soon enough. I had to walk a few floors just to clear my head. Every step down that stairwell felt like I was walking back in time. My dad came to the US from Croatia when he was 24 with a backpack, a couple bucks, and a cousin's couch to sleep on. First job he ever had here was mopping floors at an airport logistics warehouse in Joliet. By 40, he was running half the Midwest for the same company, regional director. Everyone called him Mr. V because his last name was too hard to pronounce. He didn't mind. He spoke 5 languages, drank his coffee black with 2 sugar cubes, and swore the only contract worth anything was a handshake and a man's word. That worked until the buyout happened. I was 16 when it started. Dad came home quiet one night, loosened his tie, and poured a drink before dinner. That was new. A few months later, I heard the name Remick for the first time. Stanley Remick, the new VP from corporate, younger than Dad, way colder. Came in with a team and a strategy memo thick enough to choke someone, called it streamlining operations. What it really meant was cutting loose anyone who'd been there long enough to earn a pension. First, they pulled my dad's biggest accounts and handed them to younger project leads. Then they flagged his reports. Inconsistencies. They couldn't explain, but kept bringing up. Next thing I know, he's being sent home early for rest. He was 52, fit, sharp. Nobody rests at 52 unless something's wrong. They made him train the guy who took over his job, some fresh out of college kid with gelled hair and shiny shoes. Dad shook his hand anyway, even invited him for a barbecue once. That was my dad, too proud to complain, too stubborn to quit. But he got quieter, started spending hours in the garage, smoking, watching the radio dials instead of turning them. I'd find him in there, coat still on, staring into space like the world had taken something from him, and he couldn't figure out how to get it back. One morning, I came down for school and saw him slumped at the kitchen table, coffee half full, stack of rejection letters, unpaid bills, and one insurance notice spread out like a fan in front of him. His eyes were open, but he wasn't there. Massive heart attack, gone before breakfast. I didn't cry that day, not then. I called 911, held my mom, signed whatever the funeral director shoved in front of me. But later that night, I sat at his desk, going through the folders he kept locked up, and found a thick manila envelope labeled merger. Inside were notes, emails, internal memos. One name showed up on every page: Stanley Remick. I stared at it for hours. 10 years later, when I saw that name again, Senior Vice President, Domestic Operations, Rockwell Supply, I didn't even blink. I just kept my face straight, nodded through the interview, and waited for the offer letter. I didn't go in for the paycheck. I didn't go in for the benefits or the title. I went in for him. But this wasn't about throwing punches. It wasn't about burning it all down in a rage. Number. That would have been too easy, and over too fast. This was going to be slower. I was going to build something so solid, so quietly dangerous, that when it fell, Stanley would feel every splinter driving through his legacy. My dad died with his boots still on. Stanley never looked back. I wasn't about to let that stand. So, while everyone else in that company chased promotions and played office politics, I played the long game, learned the players, took the bad assignments, ate the shit sandwich with a smile, because I knew my time was coming, and when it did, he wouldn't even see it coming. I started slow. First few weeks at Rockwell, I barely said more than 10 words in meetings. I kept my head down, took the assignments no one else wanted, and smiled through every half-assed welcome aboard from managers who couldn't remember my name. Stanley didn't even look at me twice. That was exactly how I wanted it. My job title was Junior Procurement Manager, Translation. Do the grunt work, shut up about it, and maybe one day you'll get a plaque. But I used that title like a crowbar. It gave me access, contracts, site visits, supplier calls, onboarding documents, the works. Stanley hated dealing with foreign vendors, said it was too complicated, too emotional, too risky. So anytime global sourcing got messy, I was the guy they tossed it to. And I played it perfect. The calm fixer, no complaints, always got results. But what they didn't realize was that every mess I cleaned up, I turned it into a connection. Like with Tanaka in Osaka. Her factory sat behind a noodle shop on a narrow side street, tucked between apartment buildings like it had been forgotten by time. I sat with her for 4 hours one night. Our time zones barely lined up, and she showed me how her grandmother still stitched test samples by hand. Her English was shaky, but she knew her business. I learned everything: what dye batches they used, who handled customs, even the name of the stray cat that wandered into their warehouse every morning. Same with the Petrovas. Their packaging plant sat on the edge of a border town that had been bombed to rubble in the early 90s. Now it was rebuilt, bare walls, second-hand equipment, but spotless. Their daughter Anya ran quality control while their son did shipping. We spoke twice a week, not just about orders, about life, winter storms, power outages, what food prices looked like, and Santos. His machine shop in Mexico had pictures of his daughters on every wall, tiny handprints on the cabinets, plastic dolls stuffed between gear shelves. He trained those girls like they were already his successors. His shop floor was cleaner than half our offices in Chicago. These people weren't just vendors. They were survivors, builders, just like my dad had been. They knew what it meant to work yourself sick just to keep something alive. So I started making sure their contracts worked for them, not just Rockwell. I added withdrawal clauses, penalty protections, early alerts. Nothing illegal, just smart, just human. Stanley never noticed. He didn't read the clauses, didn't care. He saw lower costs, faster shipping, and a quarterly report that made him look like a genius. Every time he stood in front of the board bragging about margins, I just sat there taking notes. By month 15, I had everything: site photos, family bios, production videos, performance data, even testimonials from their workers. I cataloged it all, tied each supplier directly to Rockwell's product lines. If Stanley ever tried to cut them loose, it wouldn't just hurt, it would bleed, and I knew he would. That man couldn't resist cutting things he didn't understand. He kept pushing this domestic-first agenda, said real Americans want real American supply chains, said global was too unstable, kept talking about made in the USA like he had invented the damn phrase. I just kept nodding. So, when he finally did it, when he walked into the morning meeting and nuked every international contract in 3 clicks, I didn't flinch. He thought he was being strategic. What he really did was light a match. The network I'd built, the one stitched together from late-night calls and translation apps and handwritten invoices, that was the gas. Every supplier I'd worked with had a clause. If one of them got dropped without proper cause, all of them could walk, together without penalties. Stanley never saw it. Legal signed off without reading too deep. He was too busy waving the cost savings flag to notice the floor disappearing under his feet. The moment he hit terminate on Tanaka's contract, the countdown started. I didn't need to lift a finger. All I had to do was watch the fuse burn. First call went to Tanaka. She picked up before the first ring finished. I didn't waste time. He pulled the plug. You're terminated as of this morning. There was silence on the line, then just one question. Is it time? I answered. Yeah, it's time. She hung up. By noon, the Petrovas were already on the phone with Santos. I didn't tell them to call, didn't have to. The signal was baked in. One cut meant all ties were off. A few hours after that, Santos hit up the Taiwanese supplier. Taiwan called Vietnam. Vietnam messaged South Korea. It spread backwards, like a controlled demolition. One charge setting off the next, floor by floor. I didn't call any of them again. I didn't need to. The contract spoke for me. By Wednesday, it started showing up in the system. Order delays, missed shipments, inventory flags. At first, Stanley brushed it off, said it was transition friction, told the ops team to reassign orders to domestic vendors. Keep it lean, he said. Keep it American. By Thursday, production lines in Indiana, South Carolina, and Ohio had completely halted. Materials weren't arriving. Machines were sitting cold. Factory managers were losing their minds. The domestic vendors Stanley had promised would scale instantly, either quoted double the price or flat out said no. One of them, I heard this firsthand, told our buyer, "We're not magicians, man. You want 10,000 units in 2 weeks?" Good luck Stanley showed up that morning looking like he hadn't slept. His shirt was wrinkled, hair out of place. He stomped through the office barking at interns, demanding updates from project leads, blaming logistics, then legal, then procurement. He never looked at me. I sat at my desk, headphones in, acting like I was chasing vendor alternatives. In reality, I was documenting everything. Every failed order, every rude email he sent, every outburst he threw in the hallway. The more pressure he felt, the more reckless he got. "Ungrateful bastards," he muttered loud enough for a whole pod to hear. "They should be begging to work with us." When Tanaka's factory posted a public notice announcing a new partnership with a German textile brand, Stanley slammed his laptop shut so hard it echoed. "They're playing games," he snapped. "They're bluffing." "They're gone," I said, not even turning around. He stared at me. First time he really looked at me since the day he cut them loose. "What did you say?" I met his eyes. "They're gone. They had clauses. You triggered them." He scoffed, waved me off, muttered something about legal checking everything, but I could see it in his face. He didn't check a damn thing. He didn't read a damn thing. He thought he could slash and burn, and everyone would just take it, like my dad had, like so many others had. Not this time. That afternoon, the Petrovas issued their own termination notice. 2 hours later, Santos replied to a client inquiry with a one-line response. "We no longer supply Rockwell." By the time Stanley realized what was happening, the house was already on fire. I watched him storm out of a meeting, red-faced, shouting into his phone. "They were nothing. We made them. No, they made us." And now they were walking away with the screws and bolts and precision parts we couldn't replace. I took a screenshot of every supplier's departure statement, every email confirming their walkout. I added timestamps, mapped them against Stanley's terminations, highlighted the clauses. Every page told the same story. One man's arrogance had undone the whole system, and I kept documenting his tone, his words, his meltdown. "They're dead weight," he shouted at one point. "We're better off without them." I saved that quote too. I didn't need revenge speeches or dramatic showdowns. I just needed the truth, on record, in his own words. And by Friday, that truth was all over the building. Monday morning, 8 sharp, I was in the executive conference room. Didn't even have time to grab coffee. I wasn't supposed to be there. I wasn't even a manager. But the CEO's assistant walked straight up to my desk, handed me a lanyard, and said, "You're needed upstairs. You're the only guy who understands this mess." That's when I knew Stanley was cooked. I walked in behind two directors, slid into the last seat at the long table, and opened my laptop. Stanley was already mid-pitch, pacing in front of a wall-sized screen like he was still in control. "Global is unstable," he was saying. "Our domestic pivot was a strategic correction. We've relied too heavily on foreign inputs that are unreliable, unaccountable, and frankly, ungrateful." He clicked to a chart showing red arrows and buzzwords like agility, resilience, and cost neutrality. Someone coughed. The CEO didn't blink. "Stan," he said, "enough. Sit down." Stanley froze. "Sir, Sit. Down." He sat. Then the CEO looked straight at me. "Alex, tell me what actually happened." No one else spoke. Half the room didn't even know my name until that moment. I stayed seated, turned my laptop toward the screen, and shared my screen. First slide, Tanaka's workshop. A photo of her standing in front of her grandmother, who was stitching fabric by hand in the background. "This is Tanaka Textiles in Osaka," I said. "They customized their output line to match Rockwell's specs. We were their biggest client. They were ours too, in that category." Next slide, the Petrova's plant. Then Santos with his daughters in the shop. Each photo paired with one stat: delivery accuracy, production capacity, reinvestment ratio. These aren't just suppliers. They're strategic partners. Every one of them adapted their operations to serve Rockwell's model. I flipped to the next slide. "And this," I paused, "is what happens when you cancel $46 million in contracts in 48 hours without reading the clauses." I clicked through screenshots of emails, supplier withdrawal notices, operational logs showing stalled production. Then the real slide, the one that made the room go dead silent. Emails from Stanley, mocking Tanaka's English. Calling Santos a nice guy, but probably too backward to scale. Dismissing the Petrovas as emotionally high maintenance. The CEO's jaw tightened. One VP leaned forward and asked, "Were these official communications?" "Internal memos," I said. "System flagged them under vendor feedback." Then came the final slide. The contract clause. Highlighted, circled, red underlined, coordinated withdrawal. Triggered by a single breach. No penalties. The CEO leaned back in his chair. "Stan," he said calmly, "did you know these were in the contracts?" Stanley shifted in his seat. "Legal should have—" "No," the CEO snapped, louder this time. "You should have." No one said a word. Stanley looked around like someone was going to bail him out. No one did. I watched the moment it hit him. His face didn't change much, but I saw it in his eyes. That flash of panic people get when they realize they're not walking out of the room the same way they came in. The CEO turned to me. "Can we recover these relationships?" "Maybe," I said, "but not fast." And definitely not with him in charge. Stanley tried to speak again. "This kid's been—" The CEO cut him off. "Enough." He stood up, grabbed the remote from Stanley's hand, and shut the presentation down. "We're done here," he said. And just like that, Stanley Remick, the man who'd gutted my father's career, who thought he could bulldoze his way through another generation, was left sitting there, shoulders tight, mouth half open, looking like he finally understood what it felt like to be the one left behind. The conference room emptied fast. Nobody looked at Stanley, not even a glance. I stayed seated until the CEO shut the door behind him. That same afternoon, I started making calls, not begging, not apologizing, just laying it out. "Tanaka-san," I said, "I'm not calling as Rockwell. I'm calling as me. What would it take for you to even consider coming back?" She didn't hesitate. "I trust you, but not your leadership, not him." Santos said the same thing. Petrovas too. Even the Taiwanese supplier, who rarely said more than a few words, replied with, "Maybe." If Stanley's nowhere near our files, I typed every response out, word for word, and forwarded it directly to the CEO. No spin, no sugarcoating. He called me in 2 hours later, just me and him in his office, door shut. He held up the printed email chain, his thumb pressed against the line about Stanley. "They really all said this?" he asked. "Exactly like that," I said. "Some softened it, most didn't. They're not coming back if he's still in charge of anything supplier-facing. He sat back in his chair, staring at the ceiling like it might offer a better answer than I had. After a minute, he looked at me. "You're sure you can rebuild this?" "I know the players. I know the history. I know what they need, but this time, we do it on their terms." He nodded slowly, then tossed the printouts onto his desk like they weighed 50 pounds. 3 days later, Stanley was transitioned into a compliance oversight role. No announcement, no email. Just gone from the weekly calls, his name yanked off every project doc. Someone else sat in his office by Friday. The CEO called me in again, handed me a new badge, Head of Global Vendor Relations. "I didn't ask for this," I said. "I know," he replied. "That's why you're getting it." It wasn't a celebration, no handshake, no champagne. Just a man in a suit looking at a younger man who'd cleaned up the disaster he'd been too blind to stop. I moved into a corner office that weekend, didn't decorate, didn't even unpack right away. Too much to fix. I spent the next few days writing emails, lining up Zoom calls across 5 time zones, explaining what had changed and why it wouldn't happen again. Most suppliers didn't say yes right away, but they listened. They asked questions. They didn't hang up. And for the first time since walking into Rockwell, I didn't feel like I was chasing approval. I was setting the terms. Stanley stuck around for 6 more months, showed up late, missed calls, started skipping travel. I'd see him sometimes walking the hall with a folder in his hand. No destination, just trying to look busy. People stopped copying him on things. Projects got reassigned quietly. His name disappeared from the org chart before his body did. Then one morning, he was just gone. No announcement, no goodbye. Last I heard, he took a compliance job out west, mid-tier distributor, dealing with retail returns, chasing down lost pallets, answering to warehouse managers who didn't care about his Ivy League degree. I pictured him in a folding chair in some converted office with a broken AC unit, fielding complaints about mislabeled packaging and crushed boxes. He'll never know who I am to him, never know I watched him kill my father's career when I was just a kid, that I read every internal memo with his name on it after the funeral, that I stared at that smug little headshot on the company site and memorized it before I was even old enough to drink. He'll never know that I walked into Rockwell not for a paycheck, but to bury him professionally. I didn't tell the board, didn't grandstand, didn't make some speech about justice or karma. I didn't need to. My revenge wasn't loud, it was deliberate. Every supplier who cut ties did it with his name on the termination. Every production failure, every missed deadline, every dollar lost. His fault. All his. And everyone in that boardroom knew it. The only reason Rockwell survived? Because I built what he couldn't. Trust. Not a flashy strategy, not buzzwords and fake smiles. Real conversations, real people. The kind of work my dad believed in. The best part? Watching the CEO lean across the boardroom table, look Stanley dead in the face and say, "You destroyed relationships we didn't even know we depended on." That line, that was it. That was the win. I didn't say a word after that. Just stood there, hands in my pockets, while Stanley sat frozen in his chair, blinking like a man who finally understood he was never the smartest guy in the room. If you're still listening, here's what I want you to know. Every man has a line, and when someone crosses it, sometimes the best revenge is just letting them trip over it. You don't need to scream. You don't need to swing. You just need to remember, wait, plan, and when the time comes, let their own ego do the rest.